Ever been so angry you could sue God, but decided to sue the local homeowners association instead because their lawyer is cheaper to depose? Yeah, me too. Stick around, because you are not going to believe the story of how my quiet retirement plan got bulldozed, literally, and how the HOA president who did it ended up paying for my new barn. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, especially if you've ever had a run-in with a suburban tyrant on a power trip. This one is a doozy. It all started with a patch of land. Not just any patch, but 250 acres of rolling Texas hill country that I had bought with the explicit purpose of escaping people like Carol. For 30 years, I was a lawyer in Dallas. Not the kind you see on television commercials promising to get you a big settlement for your slip and fall. I was the guy the Fortune 500 companies called when they needed to perform corporate surgery with a chainsaw. Hostile takeovers, contract litigation with nine-figure stakes, dismantling corrupt boards, that was my playground. It was a brutal, soul-crushing existence that paid exceptionally well. My retirement plan was simple: buy a massive piece of land far from any city, build a modest house, and spend the rest of my days listening to cicadas instead of subpoenas. For 2 years, it was bliss. My nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the only board meetings I attended involved a checkerboard and my ranch hand, Jeb. Jeb was a man carved from old leather and barbed wire, with a vocabulary consisting mostly of grunts and grim predictions about the weather. He'd worked this land for 40 years before I bought it, and I kept him on because he knew every rock, tree, and gopher hole on the property. He was the soul of the place, and my only real friend out here. The trouble began subtly. A new housing development sprang up on the land adjacent to the eastern border of my ranch. It was called Whispering Oaks Estates, which was ironic because the first thing they did was cut down all the oaks to whisper about. It was an upscale community of McMansions, promising exclusive country living. I didn't pay it much mind. I had a thick buffer of my own property between my house and their perfectly manicured lawns. I figured a good fence makes a good neighbor, and my fences were very, very good. The first sign of the coming storm was a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade parked by my eastern fence line. Inside, a woman with voluminous blonde hair and sunglasses the size of dinner plates was pointing emphatically toward my property. I was out checking the fence with Jeb, and he just grunted. HOA, he muttered, as if it were a diagnosis of a terminal illness. That was Carol. I didn't know her name then, but her aura of entitled impatience preceded her. She was the president of the Whispering Oaks HOA, a fact she would later announce with the same gravity as someone declaring themselves Queen of England. A week later, I had to fly back to Dallas to finalize the handover of my last major case. It was a complex piece of litigation that required my physical presence. I was gone for 10 days. 10 days. In that time, Carol and her Whispering Oaks cronies didn't just cross a line, they paved it. When I drove back up the long gravel road to my house, I saw it. A ribbon of stark, black asphalt, 20 feet wide, cutting a clean, obscene arc through the southeast corner of my pasture. It connected their perfect little cul-de-sac directly to the main county road, effectively shaving 5 minutes off their commute. They had taken a shortcut through my life. My peaceful, quiet, secluded life. I stopped my truck and just stared. It was a professional job, graded, paved, even had a neat little gravel shoulder. They had cut through my fence, torn up about 3 acres of pristine grazing land that I had been painstakingly restoring with native grasses, and created a highway for their luxury SUVs. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like finding out a stranger had come into your house, knocked down a wall to your bedroom to create a hallway to their bathroom, and then sent you a bill for the paint. I felt a familiar, cold fire ignite in my gut. It was the same feeling I used to get right before dismantling a CEO on the witness stand. The feeling of righteous, calculated fury. I hadn't felt it in 2 years, and I honestly hated that it was back. Jeb pulled up in his beat-to-hell ranch truck, took one look at the road, then at my face, and spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Well," he said, his voice dry as a drought, "looks like you got new neighbors, the friendly kind." His sarcasm was a balm on my incandescent rage. I took a deep breath, the smell of fresh asphalt filling my lungs, and making me want to commit acts of creative vandalism with a backhoe. Jeb, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Do me a favor. Go get the big tractor. And the oldest, rustiest, leakiest piece of equipment we own. We're closing this road. He just nodded, a faint glint in his eye that might have been the stirrings of a smile. The battle for my ranch had begun. I was retired, but it was becoming clear that the skills I'd spent a lifetime honing were about to be put to use one more time. Carol of Whispering Oaks had no idea who she had just provoked. She saw a quiet old retiree. She was about to meet the lawyer he had tried so hard to bury. Blocking the road was the easy part. It was also, from a strategic standpoint, the first move in a game of chess she thought was checkers. We dragged a dilapidated 1960s-era hay rake, a massive thing of rust and tangled metal teeth, and parked it squarely in the middle of their new asphalt artery. We followed it up with a line of the biggest hay bales we could produce, creating a soft, formidable, and entirely immovable wall. Then, for good measure, I drove my old F-250 up and parked it right behind the bales, took the keys, and went to make a pot of coffee. The immediate response was a symphony of car horns, a sound I hadn't heard since I left Dallas. It was music to my ears. Within an hour, the pearl-white Escalade was back, and Carol emerged. She was a vision in a turquoise velour tracksuit, her face a mask of pinched fury. She marched up to the hay bale barricade as if she intended to dismantle it with her bare, manicured hands. I decided to make a polite, neighborly inquiry. I strolled out, coffee mug in hand, projecting an air of mild, grandfatherly confusion. Jeb leaned against the fence, arms crossed, a silent, grim sentinel. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. She jabbed a finger, tipped with a lethally long acrylic nail at the barricade. "What is the meaning of this? You are illegally obstructing a public road." Her voice was high and shrill, the kind that could peel paint. I feigned ignorance. "Public road, ma'am? This is my pasture. Or it was, until someone laid down all this asphalt." I gestured at the road with my mug. "I figured some government crew got lost and made a mistake. I'm just securing my property until I can get it sorted out." Her face went from pinched to purple. "This is not a mistake. The Whispering Oaks Homeowners Association commissioned this road. It's an access easement. It's on all the plans." She squawked, radiating an aura of absolute certainty that only the truly ignorant can achieve. This was the moment, the first lie. An access easement is a specific legal right, recorded in deeds and property records. The idea that one could exist without my knowledge the owner of the property was laughable. It was the legal equivalent of claiming the moon owed you rent. "An easement," I replied, raising my eyebrows. "That's very interesting. I'm a stickler for paperwork. I'm sure you wouldn't mind showing me a copy of the recorded easement agreement, the one with my signature on it, or the signature of the previous owner. I've got all the property deeds in my office, and I must have missed that page." This threw her. Her tirade stuttered to a halt. You could see the hamster wheel in her brain spinning furiously, trying to come up with a response that didn't involve admitting she'd just paved a road on a stranger's land without permission. It's in the county records. Our developer handled all of that," she finally sputtered. "You can't just block it. I'm calling the sheriff." I gave her my most benevolent smile. "Please do. I'd love to have an official police report documenting the trespassing and the vandalism to my property. It'll be very helpful later." That was the first time she looked at me with a flicker of uncertainty. I wasn't rolling over. I wasn't intimidated. I was using words like trespassing and vandalism and police report. This wasn't the script she had in her head. She stormed back to her Escalade, shouting threats about lawsuits and how I would regret this. As she drove off, kicking up gravel from my actual driveway, Jeb finally spoke. "She's gonna be trouble." I nodded, watching her go. "Yes, she is, Jeb, but trouble is a language I happen to speak fluently." The sheriff's deputies arrived about an hour later, 2 of them looking deeply unenthusiastic about getting involved in a rich people squabble. I greeted them calmly, offered them a cold drink, and walked them through the situation. I showed them my property survey map, a large, professionally drafted document that clearly showed my uninterrupted property lines. I had a copy of my title insurance policy and the deed. "As you can see, officers," I said, tracing the boundary with my finger, This is all my land. The Whispering Oaks development ends right here. I pointed to the fence line. There is no recorded easement for a road. What you see is a private citizen, in this case the president of an HOA, directing a construction company to illegally enter my property, destroy a fence, and build a road without my consent. One of the deputies, the older one with a tired mustache, sighed heavily. He had seen this movie before. They walked over to the edge of the development, where a gaggle of Whispering Oaks residents had gathered to watch the drama unfold, Carol at their head. The deputies talked to her for about 20 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could read the body language. Carol was agitated, waving her arms. The deputy was calm, occasionally pointing back at me and my map. Eventually, the deputies came back over. "Well, sir," the mustached one said, "it seems to be a civil matter. She's claiming there's an easement, you're claiming there isn't. We can't make a determination on property law. We can't force you to move your equipment, as it appears to be on your land, and we can't arrest her for trespassing without a more thorough investigation." I nodded. "I understand completely, officer. Thank you for your time. I'll be handling this through the proper channels." As they left, I saw the smug look on Carol's face. She thought the deputy's inaction was a victory for her. She interpreted "it's a civil matter" as "we can't stop you. Oh, you sweet summer child, it's a civil matter" was my home turf. She had just invited me to a game where I had spent 30 years writing the rules. That night, I didn't sleep. I converted my quiet study, the one with the peaceful view of the oak trees, back into a war room. I fired up my high-speed internet, logged into LexisNexis, and began to dig. The hunt was on. My first step was to pull every single public record associated with my property and the adjacent parcel that now housed Whispering Oaks. This wasn't just a simple Zillow search. This was a deep dive. I accessed the County Appraisal District, the County Clerk's Office for real property records, and the Secretary of State's database for corporate filings. I was looking for a chain of title, a history of every transaction, easement, lien, and covenant attached to that land, going back 100 years. For a normal person, this would be a labyrinth of legalese and bureaucratic red tape. For me, it was like reading a familiar bedtime story. I spent 2 full days fueled by coffee and a growing sense of vindication, cross-referencing parcel numbers, deed book pages, and survey abstracts. I found exactly what I expected to find: nothing. There was no easement, no right-of-way, not a single document in the entire recorded history of my 250 acres granted anyone the right to build a road on it. My property was legally pristine. The fascinating part came when I started digging into the developer of Whispering Oaks. The LLC that owned the development, Oakhaven Partners LLC, was a shell corporation, as they often are. But digging into their registration documents, I found the name of the managing partner. And that name rang a bell. A very, very loud bell. It was a name connected to a massive real estate conglomerate I had tangled with about a decade prior. It was a brutal fight over a breached contract for a commercial development in Houston. My firm represented the smaller company that had been screwed over, and we didn't just win. We systematically dismantled their case, exposed fraudulent practices within their accounting department, and ended up costing their parent company nearly $100 million in damages and stock devaluation. I had personally cross-examined their CEO until he was a puddle of sweat and contradictions on the stand. They would remember my name. This was a gift. It meant there was a history, and where there's history, there's leverage. While I was unearthing legal skeletons, Carol was escalating. A letter arrived via certified mail. It was from a law firm, a small, local outfit that probably handled wills and the occasional DUI. The letter was full of bluster and poorly cited statutes, demanding I immediately remove my unlawful obstructions from the Whispering Oaks access road and cease my campaign of harassment. It threatened legal action to enforce the association's, quote, 100enforcetheassociations.com ATTF-AID. Clear and indisputable rights. The letter also contained an attachment, and this was the moment the entire affair went from a civil dispute to criminal fraud. The attachment was a photocopy of a document titled Easement and Right-of-Way Agreement. It purported to be an agreement between the previous owner of my ranch, an elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, and Oakhaven Partners LLC, granting them the right to construct a road across the corner of the property. It was dated 2 years prior, just before I bought the place. It even had what looked like Mr. Abernathy's signature and the seal of a notary public. To the untrained eye, it might have looked legitimate. To me, it screamed forgery. The font used for the body of the text was Times New Roman, but the dateline was in Calibri, a classic copy-paste error. The notary seal was blurry, a common sign of a scanned and photoshopped image. The signature for Mr. Abernathy looked shaky, but it didn't quite match the signature I had on file from the closing documents when I bought the ranch. Most damningly, the legal language was sloppy. It used phrases like aforementioned parcel of land without ever mentioning the parcel in the first place. It was the kind of document an amateur, perhaps an overconfident HOA president with access to a scanner and a printer, would create. Carol hadn't just trespassed, she had now, in all likelihood, committed felony, level forgery and fraud upon the court by presenting this document via her attorney. She had handed me a sword, and she was about to find out I knew exactly where to stick it. I immediately hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent I'd worked with before, to do 2 things. First, track down the notary public listed on the document. Second, find Mr. Abernathy. He had retired to a community in Arizona, and I needed to talk to him. While my PI got to work, I hired a professional land surveyor, the best in the state, to come out and perform a full boundary survey and stake my property lines. It was expensive, but the visual impact of a series of bright orange flags and wooden stakes marching precisely along my boundary, showing unequivocally that the road was dozens of feet inside my land, would be powerful. It would be irrefutable physical evidence to back up my paper trail. When the survey crew arrived, Carol and a few of her acolytes came out to watch, sneering from their side of the fence. "Wasting your money, old man," she yelled. "That road is ours." I just smiled and waved. The surveyor, a stoic man named Marcus, took his measurements with painstaking precision, completely ignoring them. When he was done, he handed me a preliminary report. "It's not even close, Mr. Henderson," he said, shaking his head. "They're a good 40 feet onto your property at the deepest point. This is one of the most blatant encroachments I've ever seen." He promised a certified, sealed survey map within 48 hours. The pieces were all coming together. Carol thought she was in a shouting match. I was preparing for a surgical strike. The lawsuit she had threatened was about to become a reality, but it would be hers to defend, not prosecute. The phone call from my private investigator came 3 days later. It was even better than I had hoped. "Okay, so the notary," he began, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Maria Flores. She exists. She's a licensed notary in San Antonio. She's also been dead for 3 years. Died of a heart attack a full year before she supposedly notarized your document. Bingo, a ghost notary." Using a deceased person's credentials is a particularly stupid brand of fraud because it's so easy to disprove. "And what about Mr. Abernathy?" I asked. "Found him. He's 88 years old, sharp as a tack. He remembers selling the ranch to you fondly. When I asked him about any easement agreement with a developer, he just laughed. Said, and I quote, 'Those vultures wanted a slice of my land for a road, and I told them to go pound sand. I wouldn't give them sweat off my brow, let alone a right-of-way.' He's perfectly willing to sign a sworn affidavit to that effect." This was it, the smoking gun, a forged document, a deceased notary, and a living, credible witness to refute the entire basis of Carol's claim. Any competent lawyer would see this and immediately advise their client to retreat, apologize, and beg for mercy. Carol, however, was not represented by a competent lawyer. And Carol, as I was learning, was pathologically incapable of admitting defeat. Her next move proved it. A few days after the surveyors left their colorful flags all over my pasture, a process server showed up at my door, a young kid looking nervous, as they always do. He handed me a packet of documents. It was a lawsuit. The Whispering Oaks Estates Homeowners Association, Inc. versus John Henderson. They were suing me. They were actually suing me for blocking the road they illegally built on my land based on a forged document. The petition sought an immediate injunction to force me to remove the barricade and demanded damages for interfering with their vested property rights. I leafed through the petition. It was a masterpiece of incompetence, citing inapplicable case law and making bold, unsubstantiated claims. And there, attached as Exhibit A, was the fraudulent easement document, now officially filed with the court. This was the stupidest thing she could have possibly done. Before, it was a private dispute with a fake document. By filing it with the court, she had committed perjury and attempted to defraud a judge. She had taken a shovel and dug her own legal grave. I thanked the process server, closed the door, and allowed myself a small, cold smile. I picked up the phone and called my old firm in Dallas. "Sarah, it's John," I said when my former partner answered. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to be my local counsel of record." "No, I'm not coming back to the firm. I'm being sued, and I'm going to represent myself, pro se. I just need you to handle the e-filings. Oh, and you might want to pull up the case. The plaintiff's attorney is a guy named Bill Callahan out of Marble Falls. You might want to give him a friendly, professional courtesy call. Let him know who he's up against. Let him know that his client just submitted a forged instrument to the court. Let him know that I'm filing a countersuit for trespassing, property damage, slander of title, fraud, and I'm going for full treble damages and attorney's fees. And tell him I'm also filing a motion for sanctions against him and his client for filing a frivolous lawsuit based on a fraudulent claim." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "My God, John," Sarah said. "What did these people do to you?" I looked out the window at the ugly black gash running through my pasture. "They disturbed my retirement." The next day, our answer and countersuit were filed with the court. The official record now read, Henderson, John, appearing pro se. I imagined Bill Callahan, ESQ, seeing that filing pop up on his computer. I pictured him looking up my name on the State Bar Registry, seeing my 30-year history, the list of my published articles in law journals, the landmark cases I had won. I pictured his folksy, small-town confidence evaporating like a puddle in the August sun. Carol had wanted a war. She was about to get one, fought on my terms in my arena, and I never lose. The reaction from the other side was swift, and it told me everything I needed to know. Less than 24 hours after my countersuit was filed, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Callahan Law Office. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't going to give him the courtesy of an informal chat. Everything from this point forward would be on the record. The voicemail he left was a study in panicked backpedaling. The blustering tone from his demand letter was gone, replaced by a strained, conciliatory one. Mr. Henderson, Bill Callahan here. Listen, I think there may have been some miscommunication regarding this property matter. My client was operating under information she believed to be true. Perhaps we could all sit down and discuss a resolution before this gets any more complicated. Complicated was his word for, my client is about to be investigated for multiple felonies, and I might get sanctioned into oblivion for not doing my due diligence. I had no intention of letting them off the hook. With a simple chat, Carol had chosen the battlefield. I was simply choosing the weapons. My response was a formal email, CCing my counsel of record, Sarah. It stated that while I was always open to a reasonable settlement discussion, any such discussion would have to take place within the formal structure of a legal mediation, and only after they had provided full responses to my initial discovery requests. I wasn't just going to let them withdraw their suit and walk away. They had slandered my title, damaged my property, and tried to defraud a court. There had to be consequences. My discovery requests were, to put it mildly, brutal. In my professional life, I was known for using the discovery process like a sledgehammer to find every crack in an opponent's foundation. I sent them a 50-page request for production of documents. I asked for every single piece of correspondence related to the road mails, text messages, memos. I demanded all communications between Carol and the paving company. I requested all HOA board meeting minutes for the past 2 years. I asked for their complete financial records, including bank statements and expense reports. My theory was that Carol had likely used HOA funds to pay for the road, possibly without full board approval, and was now using their money to fund her personal legal crusade. I also sent a set of interrogatories written questions they were required to answer under oath. My questions were pointed and precise. Please identify the individual who drafted the document attached as Exhibit A to your petition. Please state the date and time the alleged easement agreement was executed. Please provide the current residential address and contact information for the notary public, Maria Flores. They had 30 days to respond. 30 days to either commit perjury by lying in their answers or admit the truth and implode their own case. It was a beautiful, inescapable legal vice. While they squirmed, I moved forward on another front. I used my old corporate connections to get the direct phone number for the executive VP of the parent company of Oakhaven Partners, the developer. This was the conglomerate I had battled years ago. I left a message. Mr. Davenport, my name is John Henderson. You probably don't remember me, but I represented the plaintiffs in the Sterling Commerce case about 10 years back. I'm calling about a small matter regarding a development your subsidiary, Oakhaven Partners, built next to my property. There seems to be a fraudulent document in circulation bearing your company's name. I thought you'd want to know before this becomes a much larger and more public, legal issue. I got a call back in less than 15 minutes. Davenport remembered me all too well. His voice was wary. I explained the situation calmly and professionally. The road, the fake easement, the lawsuit. I emailed him a copy of the forgery. He was silent for a long time. Mr. Henderson, he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. My company did not, and would not, authorize such an agreement. We approached the previous landowner, he refused, and the matter was dropped. The road was not part of our development plan. This is an action taken solely by the Homeowners Association after we turn the community over to them. I will have our general counsel draft a sworn affidavit to that effect immediately. We have no interest in being dragged into a fraud case, particularly one involving you. He was practically tripping over himself to disavow any connection to Carol and her road. The affidavit from the multi-billion-dollar parent company, stating unequivocally that they had no knowledge of or claim to this easement, arrived the next day. It was another nail in Carol's legal coffin. The pressure was mounting, and the cracks in the Whispering Oaks community began to show. My friend Jeb, whose cousin did landscaping in the development, was my source of ground-level intelligence. He told me that my lawsuit was the talk of the neighborhood. People were angry, not at me, but at Carol. They had been paying their HOA dues, and she was apparently using them to fund a personal vendetta that was now going to cost them a fortune. An emergency HOA meeting was called. According to Jeb's cousin, who was trimming hedges nearby, it was a shouting match. Residents were demanding to know how much this was costing them. They wanted to see the easement document for themselves. Carol, cornered and exposed, apparently doubled down, insisting the lawsuit was a necessary expense to protect their property values and that the crazy old man next door would soon be forced to yield. Her enablers on the board backed her up, but for the first time, a significant number of homeowners were openly questioning her leadership. The hive was starting to turn on the queen. Then came the discovery responses from Callahan's office right on the deadline. They were a disaster for his client. To my question about who drafted the document, he wrote, "Objection. Vague and ambiguous. Subject to attorney-client privilege. A transparently bogus objection." To the question about the notary, he wrote, "After a diligent search, defendant is unable to locate the current contact information for this individual." They were admitting they couldn't find their own notary. They refused to answer most of the substantive questions, hiding behind flimsy, boilerplate objections. It was the legal equivalent of a child putting their hands over their eyes and thinking no one can see them. For a judge, this signals one thing: they are hiding something. I immediately filed a motion to compel, asking the judge to force them to answer my questions truthfully and without objection. I also asked for sanctions against them for their evasive discovery tactics. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The stage was now set for the first formal confrontation. Carol was about to have her first taste of a real courtroom, and I was going to be sitting at the opposite table. The day of the hearing for my motion to compel arrived. It wasn't a full trial, just a procedural hearing in front of the judge, but for Carol, it was clearly the most intimidating thing she'd ever experienced. I arrived early, dressed in one of my old courtroom suits. It felt like putting on an old, familiar suit of armor. I sat at the respondent's table, my files neatly arranged in front of me, the certified survey map, the affidavit from Mr. Abernathy, the affidavit from the developer's parent company, the death certificate for Maria Flores, the notary. I had a file folder for each lie she had told. A few minutes later, Bill Callahan walked in, his briefcase looking heavier than it should. He looked pale and hadn't slept well. Behind him was Carol. She had swapped her usual tracksuit for what she must have considered her most intimidating business attire. A leopard print blazer with massive shoulder pads and enough gold-plated jewelry to set off a metal detector from 50 paces. She shot me a look of pure venom as she sat down, radiating an aura of defiant arrogance. She still thought she was in the right. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Mendez, whom I knew by reputation to be sharp and intolerant of games, called the case. Mr. Henderson, I have your motion to compel. Mr. Callahan, I have your response. Mr. Henderson, please proceed. I stood up. Your Honor, this is a simple matter. The plaintiff, Whispering Oaks HOA, sued me, claiming a right to a road they built on my property. Their entire case hinges on a single document, an easement agreement, which they attached to their petition. We believe this document is a forgery. Our discovery requests were designed to ascertain the basic facts about this document's origin. The plaintiff has refused to answer nearly every substantive question, hiding behind baseless objections. For example, Your Honor, we asked them to identify their own notary. They claim they cannot locate her. We can. She's in the San Fernando Cemetery just outside San Antonio. She passed away in 2018, a full year before she supposedly notarized this document. I placed a certified copy of the death certificate on the clerk's desk to be passed to the judge. There was a collective gasp from the small public gallery, where a few Whispering Oaks residents had come to watch. Judge Mendez looked at the death certificate, then looked over her glasses at Bill Callahan, her expression hardening. Callahan looked like he had swallowed a hornet. Carol's jaw was hanging slightly open. Furthermore, Your Honor, I continued, we have a sworn affidavit from the man who supposedly signed this easement, Mr. Abernathy, the previous owner of my property. He states unequivocally that he never saw, let alone signed, any such document. He states he explicitly refused the developer's request for an easement. I placed Mr. Abernathy's affidavit on the pile. And finally, we have an affidavit from the parent corporation of the developer themselves, stating that they have no claim to any easement and that the document is not authentic. I added the final affidavit. The plaintiffs have stonewalled our discovery because answering truthfully would require them to admit they filed a lawsuit based on a forged instrument, thereby committing a fraud upon this court. We ask that you compel them to answer, and we ask for sanctions. I sat down. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Mendez stared at Callahan, her pen tapping a slow, rhythmic, angry beat on her desk. Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, do you have anything to say to this? Any explanation at all for why you filed a case based on a document apparently notarized by a deceased person? Callahan stood up, shuffling his papers. He looked over at Carol, who was now staring at her hands, her bravado completely gone. Your Honor, we were provided this document by my client. We were operating in good faith based on the information provided. It was a weak defense, essentially throwing Carol under the bus to save his own skin. The judge was not impressed. Good faith, Mr. Callahan. Did you verify anything? Did you run a simple search on the notary? Did you even bother to check the public record for a filed copy of this easement before you sued this man? Her voice was rising with each question. This court does not appreciate being used as a tool to advance a fraudulent claim. This is an abuse of the legal process. She turned her gaze to Carol. Ma'am, you are the president of this HOA, correct? Did you give this document to your attorney? Carol looked up, her face ashen. She nodded mutely. Very well, the judge said, her voice like cracking ice. My ruling is as follows. The motion to compel is granted. The plaintiffs will provide full and complete answers to all of Mr. Henderson's discovery requests within 10 business days, without objection. Furthermore, I am issuing sanctions against both the Whispering Oaks HOA and your firm, Mr. Callahan, in the amount of $10,000 to be paid to Mr. Henderson to cover his costs for having to file this motion, and let me give you a piece of free legal advice, Mr. Callahan. You and your client are now in a very, very deep hole. I suggest you stop digging." She slammed her gavel down. "We are adjourned." The courtroom emptied out quickly. The Whispering Oaks residents who had come to watch were huddled together, whispering furiously and looking at Carol with open hostility. Bill Callahan was stuffing his papers into his briefcase, refusing to even look at his client. Carol was just sitting there, frozen, the leopard print blazer suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous. She looked small. I walked over to their table. I leaned down and spoke in a calm, quiet voice that only she and her lawyer could hear. "My settlement offer is coming to your lawyer's office tomorrow. I suggest you read it very carefully. It's your only way out of criminal charges." I didn't wait for a reply. I just turned and walked out of the courthouse, back into the sunshine. The war was over. All that was left was negotiating the terms of surrender. The settlement offer I sent was not intended to be gentle. It was designed to be a comprehensive, systematic dismantling of Carol's reign and a complete restoration of my rights and property. It was divided into 5 key demands. First, the immediate and unconditional dismissal of their lawsuit against me, with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. Second, the complete removal of the asphalt road from my property. This was not to be a cheap patch job. They were required to hire a bonded and insured civil engineering firm, approved by me, to excavate the entire roadbed, including the gravel base, and fill the area with clean topsoil. They would then be required to reseed the entire 3-acre area with the specific blend of native grasses that I had been cultivating at their sole expense. Third, financial restitution. This included the full cost of the new survey I had commissioned, my legal filing fees, the private investigator's fees, and punitive damages for the trespass, property damage, and slander of title. It also included the $10,000 in sanctions the judge had already ordered. The total came to a very specific, carefully calculated number, $147,500. Fourth, and this was the part I knew would sting the most, a public apology. The HOA would be required to draft a letter, the text of which would be approved by me, and mail it to every single homeowner in Whispering Oaks. The letter would state that the HOA, under the direction of its president, Carol, had illegally constructed a road on my private property based on a fraudulent document, that they had wrongfully filed a lawsuit against me, and that they deeply apologized for the misuse of HOA funds and the damage caused. Fifth, and finally, the immediate resignation of Carol as president of the HOA and as a member of the board. Furthermore, any board member who had voted to approve the construction of the road or the filing of the lawsuit was also required to resign. This was non-negotiable. I wanted the entire corrupt power structure gone. I gave them a deadline of 7 days to accept the offer in its entirety. If they refused or attempted to counteroffer on the core terms, the offer would be permanently withdrawn. I would then proceed with the lawsuit, file a separate civil suit against Carol personally for fraud, and, most importantly, I would turn over the entire file, the forged document, the affidavits, the death certificate, the district attorney's office with a formal request for a criminal investigation into forgery, perjury, and felony fraud. I made it clear that my offer was their one and only chance to keep this a purely civil matter. The 7 days that followed were, according to Jeb's cousin, pure chaos inside Whispering Oaks. Another emergency meeting was called, and this time, it was standing room only. My settlement offer had been circulated among the homeowners, and the fury was incandescent. They finally saw, in black and white, the depth of Carol's malfeasance and the massive financial and legal liability she had exposed them all to. The fight was no longer about a road, it was about their money, their reputation, and their own potential legal exposure as members of the association. Carol and her few remaining loyalists on the board were shouted down. People were demanding to know where the money for the road came from, where the money for the lawsuit was coming from, and how she could have possibly been so stupid. The meeting ended with a vote of no confidence in Carol's leadership. It was overwhelming. On the 6th day, I received a call from a new lawyer. Bill Callahan had, wisely, been fired. This new attorney was from a much larger, more respectable firm in Austin. He was professional, courteous, and sounded utterly exhausted. "Mr. Henderson," he said, "I have been retained by the Whispering Oaks HOA. I have your settlement demand. The board of directors has accepted all terms. We will be dismissing the suit tomorrow. The resignations you requested will be tendered, and we are prepared to wire the full settlement amount to an account of your choosing upon receipt of your signature on the release." He paused. "On behalf of the association, and frankly just from me personally, I want to apologize for what you've been put through. This never should have happened." I accepted his apology. There was no need to gloat. The system, when navigated correctly, had worked. Justice was being served. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The money appeared in my account the following week. The first thing I did was pay Jeb a handsome bonus. The second was to call up a contractor and commission the construction of a brand new, top-of-the-line barn and workshop, something I'd been wanting to do for a while. Carol's folly was paying for my future projects. A week later, a fleet of heavy equipment far larger than the one that built the road rumbled onto my property. Over the next 2 weeks, they meticulously unbuilt the road. They scraped up the asphalt, dug out the gravel, and hauled it all away. Then, truck after truck of rich, dark topsoil was brought in and carefully graded to match the original contours of my pasture. Finally, a hydro-seeding truck sprayed the entire area with the native grass mix I had specified. The ugly black scar was gone, replaced by a promising shade of green. The fence was rebuilt, stronger than before. The letter of apology, with its wonderfully groveling text approved by yours truly, went out to all the homeowners. Carol and her husband put their house up for sale less than a month later. They sold it at a loss, desperate to escape the community they had once ruled. I never saw her again. A new HOA board was elected, composed of reasonable people who were horrified by the actions of their predecessors. The new president, a retired engineer, actually came over to my property, hat in hand, to introduce himself and assure me they intended to be good neighbors. We shook hands over the new fence, and since then, we haven't had a single problem. Sometimes I walk out to that corner of my pasture. The grass has grown in thick and strong, and if you didn't know what happened, you'd never guess there was once a road there. The cicadas are buzzing, the wind rustles through the grass, and the peace is absolute. I had tried to escape my old life, to put away the weapons of litigation and conflict. But in the end, it took those very skills to protect the peace I had worked so hard to find. It turned out, you can't always just build a fence. Sometimes, you have to defend it. And there's a certain dry, ironic satisfaction in knowing that the most aggressive, entitled person I've met since leaving the city ended up paying to make my quiet country life even better. She wanted a shortcut, and in the end, all she did was build a very expensive monument to her own arrogance, a monument that now exists only in court records and the memories of a humbled community. And I have a very, very nice new barn.